Hi guys, welcome. My name is Sophia McPeak. I'm a CDBG planning specialist here with DED. I just want to thank you guys all for being here today for this training on the Admin Manuals Chapter 3 Citizen Participation. So I've listed my email here on the slide too in case you guys have any follow-up questions on citizen participation. Let's go ahead and get started. So today's training covers what citizen participation is, why it's required, and how to meet key expectations under HUD and Missouri's Citizen Participation Plan. So we'll briefly go over requirements like the community needs assessment, limited English proficiency, and the four-factor analysis. I'll also explain when a language access plan is triggered, what's required for both public hearings, including the timing and notices, and what needs to be documented at each step. We'll then wrap it up with a few reminders and helpful resources before moving on. So to begin with, what is citizen participation? Citizen participation is a formal public process that gives the community members, especially low to moderate income individuals, a meaningful role in shaping how CDBG funds are used. This ensures that local voices are involved in every stage of the process, in the grant cycle process, and identifying community needs to selecting a project and providing feedback along the way. This process must be open, inclusive, and accessible to all. It's designed to involve people who are often left out of the traditional decision-making, like seniors, persons with disabilities, non-English speakers, and those in underserved neighborhoods, etc. So every action under CDBG must reflect the commitment to public engagement. Participation isn't just a one-time form, or it's an ongoing documented effort that guides the public. And this project is how this project is developed and ensures that it truly reflects the needs throughout the community. So why is citizen participation required? It is a legal requirement under federal law, specifically 24 CFR 570. This regulation requires that each state adopt a citizen participation plan, or CPP, and every local government applying for CDBG funds must follow this plan. So it sets a clear expectation for public involvement, including holding at least one public hearing prior to submitting the application, offering technical assistance when required, and responding to any written complaints within 15 working days when possible. Local governments must also ensure that outreach efforts actively include low to moderate income residents and provide access to records and remove barriers for people with disabilities or those who don't speak English. These steps just help to ensure that the process is inclusive, accessible, and responsive to real community needs, and that every applicant is held to the same fair, transparent standard. So let's take a closer look at what Missouri's participation plan requires. So first you'll need to hold those two public hearings, one early on, which is when you complete, which some choose to complete their community needs assessment, and the other is at the end of the grant to review the project outcomes. So the public notice must be given at least 5 full days in advance on each hearing, and this typically means publishing the notice in the local newspaper. So the state also expects targeted outreach, not just a flyer. You'll need to make a real effort to include low to moderate income homes, non-English speakers, and persons with disabilities. And Missouri is very clear about documentation, so you'll need to provide those sign-in sheets, signed public hearing minutes, the copies of the notices, and proof of publication or an affidavit. So all these steps, both hearings and the outreach and records, must be finished before your application is submitted to the state. So in accordance with Missouri's Citizen Participation Plan, local governments administering CDBG funds are required to carry out a comprehensive, inclusive, and well-documented citizen participation process. This means going beyond holding a public hearing. It includes offering multiple opportunities for meaningful community input, removing barriers for participation, and ensuring transparency throughout the grant's life. So these are just some of the key obligations under Missouri's CPP. The full plan outlines additional requirements and guidance. So grantees must provide access to all project records during business hours, offer support to those residents and community members with limited access to resources, and just ensure translation and accessibility services are available as needed. And then again, any public comments or complaints must be addressed promptly in writing with clear documentation showing how input influenced the final decisions. So these requirements overall reflect HUD's priorities of equity and transparency and accountability. And lastly, holding that public hearing on time and submitting those complete and accurate documents are some very important requirements in CDBG, right alongside meeting a national objective. So even one small error at this stage could end up resulting in ineligibility. A key requirement under Missouri's Citizen Participation Plan is that all CDBG-related records must be retained at the subrecipient's office. This means everything from public notices to the sign-in sheets on applications and correspondences the meeting minutes, all must be kept and organized available on site. These records must also be accessible to the public during regular working hours, as I said previously. It's just a critical part of demonstrating compliance with HUD rules and showing that the community had their fair chance to participate, and keeping these files on record for 4 years will help keep that stay on track and organized. So Missouri CPP requires that local governments not only provide information to the public, but also actively support groups in participating effectively. So this means offering technical guidance when requested at the same level of assistance available to any local government official. So ensuring equity in program access. So this assistance may involve helping a community group understanding the program's requirements, preparing a comment or participation in proposal development. So subrecipients are expected to engage the public during every major milestone of the grant in identifying those communities' needs, reviewing the proposed activities, and evaluating their past performances. So the Community Needs Assessment, or CNA, is a required part of every CDBG application. Its purpose is to demonstrate the proposed project reflects a genuine community need and not an internal priority. So the CNA must be conducted before the project is chosen. It is not optional and must be submitted alongside the full application. So the CNA is closely tied to HUD's requirements that all CDBG-funded projects serve documented local needs and national objectives. So this process happens at the first required public hearing. It can happen before and during when you're filling it out, because the comments will go on the second page of this attachment. And it's just overall about ensuring that the public engagement shapes what gets funded. So when completing that CNA, applicants must take care to reflect the full range of the community feedback, not only the opinions that support the intended project. So HUD expects this process to be fair, inclusive, and well documented. So the CNA may include feedback that differs from staff or leadership's priorities, and that's okay. The goal is to collect input from the residents and stakeholders that shows what the community believes is most needed. So importantly, the CNA must not be edited after the fact to match the chosen project or to match that template. And if the community already has a written adopted capital improvement plan or comprehensive plan that clearly identifies that proposed activity, that document may be submitted instead of the CNA. We also have an option within the application to submit both alongside each other if your community does have both. However, the required public hearing still must be held to remain compliant with Missouri's Citizen Participation Plan, and applicants are strongly encouraged to use the official CNA template available on the DEP website. I've also linked this at the end of this PowerPoint. So now we're going to discuss another requirement prior to the public hearing. This is limited English proficiency LEP compliance. We'll also cover the 4-factor analysis and the language access plan LAP, which are key to ensuring we meet those requirements. So who are LEP persons? They are individuals who, because of their national origin, do not speak English as their primary language and have limited ability to speak, read, write, or understand. So under Title VI of the National Civil Rights Act and LEP guidance, these individuals may be entitled to language assistance for specific service or benefits. So let's talk about some of the key principles of LEP compliance. First, all CDBG projects must be LEP compliant to ensure involved access to federal programs for everyone, regardless of their national origin or English proficiency. Second, all CDBG funding recipients, including contractors, are prohibited from discrimination against anyone based on age, race, color, national origin, religion, sex, handicap, or familial status. So you must also identify your project's beneficiaries and compile demographic data. This helps to ensure all potential beneficiaries are treated equally and that no one is mistreated or discriminated against during the application process. You can also have a written grievance procedure in place to address any of those concerns. So the proposed project beneficiaries must be identified early on, and this is also in the application. Subrecipients are required to take steps to ensure meaningful access to project activities and services for all beneficiaries with limited English proficiency. So these steps can include a variety of services such as providing oral interpretation, having bilingual staff available, using telephone interpreters, and often offering written translation services. You can also give notices to staff and recipients about the availability of these services. So how do you ensure LEP compliance? So these are the 3 main steps. First, you will conduct a 4-factor analysis. Second, you will develop a language access plan, or LAP, if required. This is not always required and is dependent on the results of the 4-factor analysis. And finally, if needed, you provide the appropriate language assistance based on those last 2 steps. So the four-factor analysis is a mandatory for all subrecipients of CDBG funds. It's performed by looking at the four factors: the number of LEP persons, the frequency of contact, the importance of the project, and the resources available in the community. So ideally, you should complete the analysis before the application public hearing. However, projects that were funded before this requirement was in place must complete the analysis before the closeout public hearing. So also keep in mind, this is a relatively new requirement that we have implemented within the last few years or so older projects may not have had to do this prior to their first public hearing. For the second public hearing, it may be required. So here are the specific steps of the four-factor analysis. So first, you'll determine the number of LEP persons in your population. Then you'll determine how frequently they will encounter your project or services. And then you'll determine the importance of the CDBG funded activity. And finally, determine what resources you have available to aid those LEP persons in the project. And you can find that LEP data on the census website, which will also be linked at the end. A language access plan, or LAP, is triggered under two conditions. First, if your LEP population is 5% or greater of the local population, or at least 50 people. And second, if there are 1,000 or more LEP persons in your area. LEP persons are those who speak English less than very well. Again, and it's highly recommended that you consult with your CDBG staff before finalizing any four-factor analysis or LEP plan. So some safe harbor to comply with LEP requirements. So to meet the minimum LEP requirement, if it is triggered, is a written translation must occur for every population of eligible persons to be served or likely encountered for the CDBG funded project. So that's just a written translation of any vital document for those people. And two is if there are fewer than 50 people that reach the 5% trigger, just to provide a written notice of the right to receive oral interpretation. So there's no safe harbor for oral interpretation. Oral interpretation availability is based on the results of the four-factor analysis and is pretty open for interpretation. So now we'll discuss public hearings. So how many public hearings are required? There's no limit on how many public hearings can be held, but there must be at least two. The first before you submit your application, and the second when your project is at least 80% complete. So the hearings should be at times and locations that are convenient for most people to be able to attend. This means don't hold one when there's a major event in town or a holiday. You just want to make sure that the largest amount of people can come. And for disaster recovery and mitigation projects, they cannot be held more than 6 months before the application is submitted. So the first public hearing must include specific information and language in the hearing content requirements, like the total estimated project cost, including the amount being applied for, other state, federal funds, proposed local contributions, etc. Also the location of the project, either community-wide boundaries by name or target area. Also the percentage of LMI beneficiaries, if known, and encouragement of the area residents to attend, and along with a statement regarding the special accommodations, including limited English proficiency. So for public hearing number 1, at least one hearing must be held to address the determination of needs and review the proposed project and review the post-program performance prior to the submission of the application. So the review of the post-performance must be addressed in the public hearing, and review performance of the subrecipient in the previous program. It must occur prior to closeout of the grant, which the performance evaluation has not occurred in the previous meeting. So for more on the public number 1 notice and hearing content requirements, the intention to submit the CDB application from the responsible entity, the maximum grant amount, the type of activity that may be undertaken, and what funds must be used for, and at least that 51% of the low to moderate income individuals will be benefiting from this project. Another thing that's required to be included in the content of this public hearing number 1 is the minimization of displacement of persons resulting from the project, and assistance to any displaced persons would be provided according to the Uniform Relocation Act and Real Property Acquisition Act of 1970 as amended. The responsible entity is soliciting citizen input on current community development needs and the description of the proposed project for which the responsible entity is applying. So here's a sample of the public hearing notice and the language that is expected to be used. So this template will be linked at the end of this training, and it's also included in the FY25 competitive cycle guidelines. And you can see on there that there's some underlined portions where you'll fill in the blanks for your specific proposed project. So the second public hearing requires that is held at 80% a minimum of the 80% project completion as we previously discussed, and the purpose is to review the performance of the subrecipient on the grant before the grant is officially closed out. So here's an example of the public notice hearing, number 2, and the verbiage, and again, the underlined portions are what you will replace with your project specifics. So when posting and publishing the notice, the notification of the hearing shall be given a minimum of 5 full days in advance to allow citizens the opportunity to schedule their attendance, and the day in which the public hearing notices are advertised and the day of the public hearing do not count towards the minimum 5-day period. So the example of this hearing notice, again, is located in the guidelines and at the end of this training. And for publishing and postings, you can advertise these in the local newspaper of the widest circulation. You can post advertisements in areas providing the largest access to public input, or you can do both, 1 and 2. A consultation with CDBG staff is recommended prior to the publication and posting, just to ensure that all details are included within the postings. And counties and RPCs and COGs are required to advertise in the local newspaper of the widest circulation. They can also advertise on social media, just anything to get the most input from citizens. So now we'll move on to some required documents for citizen participation. To demonstrate compliance with CDBG citizen participation requirements, the documents below are what is needed to be submitted within your application, like the public hearing notice, an affidavit of publication or a record of posting, the sign-in sheets, the signed public hearing minutes, and any written complaints in response. Also, the community needs assessment or community plans or both, and any other documented efforts to involve citizens throughout the stages of the process, and the 4-factor analysis and LAP if triggered. So here's some helpful hints. So projects with large community involvement and understanding are always more successful. The hearing must be posted and published for 5 full days, not including the day of the posting or publication. Hold public hearings in a way that handicapped accessible people will be able to attend, and also accessible for LEP persons. And keep an attendance list of all hearings and meetings as well as the minutes. Just respond to all requests or complaints addressed at the public hearing, and alter samples to match your specific project from the previous slides, and make sure that you include all details about your proposed project, and also just to reach out to CDBG staff prior to the posting, and if you have any questions regarding the factor analysis. So on this slide here, I've listed some helpful resources: our Chapter 3 of the Admin Manual, our citizen participation for the state of Missouri, 4-factor analysis, a little tutorial on how to do it, and the actual form that you'll fill out and submit with your application. And also just a more in-depth training on 4-factor analysis, a video that's on our website, and the community needs assessment template. I've also included here my email if you have any questions regarding any of those topics, and Debbie's. But you could also reach out to our project development email.